This is the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Kendall of the notaballerina.com travel blog. Every episode I'll share travel tales from several fellow travel lovers, and together we hope to entertain and inspire you, remind you of some of your own great travel experiences, and encourage you to hit the road again soon. Hello and welcome to episode 288 of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. We're discussing today the question, is volunteer tourism good or bad? Before we start, I would love to pay my respects to the Whadjuk people of the beautiful Noongar Nation, where I'm recording this podcast today on a beautiful autumn day. If you are in Western Australia, you'll know that this time of year is full of beautiful sunny days in the high 20s Celsius. It is perfection. So I think I'm feeling lucky to live where I live. Okay, so on to, is volunteer tourism good or bad? I think, the answer is, of course, more nuanced than just good or bad. But let me start with briefly describing my own experiences. I've referenced some of them before, so I'll just describe them again really briefly. I've nearly done some long-term volunteering several times in my life. So the first instances, I was in my early 20s and I was selected in a government youth ambassador program to spend like 6 to 12 months abroad. So I nearly ended up in two different projects. One was in the Solomon Islands, helping them develop a maths education curriculum. Now that was the area I was working in at the time. I was like 23 or something, so I didn't have masses of experience, but at least I had, I guess, some knowledge of the area. So perhaps I could have done something useful there, although, I do feel like I didn't have enough experience to do a good job. But who knows? I didn't get the chance to do it. I also was almost sent to Cambodia to teach English. Obviously, I only had a kind of a general education background. I'd never taught English at that stage. Turned out later, when I did go and do that as a paid job, not as a volunteer, that I liked it and was pretty decent at it, but I didn't know that at the time. So those two projects didn't come off for reasons that are lost to history. I actually really can't remember why neither of those projects ever eventuated. But anyway, didn't get to do it, but maybe would have been reasonably useful if I'd gone. I'm not sure. Anyway, the only other time I've nearly volunteered was in 2004. I was living in Europe and I nearly went to Greece as a volunteer for the Athens Summer Olympics. I might have also mentioned this sometime before, but the volunteer position I got, I just, applied with probably many thousands of others. The position I was offered was as a car park attendant at a remote car park, not next to a stadium or of any kind, and the only accommodation I could find was a very expensive tent on the roof of a building. And at the time I was living and working in Slovakia, so I did not have huge savings, and it was going to cost me a bomb to go and live in a tent on a roof for a fortnight and stand in a hot car park. So anyway, I decided not to do that, and then got an offer of a job in Germany, so I did that instead. So that was, if I think about that kind of volunteer travel or volunteer work, maybe it was at least not bad volunteer tourism. I'm imagining that in a case like the Olympics, they need a ton of extra people and they aren't going to pay any of them anyway. So perhaps I wouldn't have been taking work away from any local. But even so, if it was today, I would investigate more before going ahead with something like that. So that's my experience, and I've hinted at some of the reasons that volunteerism can be good or bad or suboptimal. But now I've got some stories and information from guests who know a lot about this issue. First up, I'm chatting with Eliza Raymond from Good Travel, and she actually got started on the voluntourism path as a very young adult and has learnt a lot about it since.
The travel story I tell over and over is from when I was 18, and it was my first travel experience, independent travel experience. And I went to volunteer at an orphanage in Guatemala. And yes, I was 18. I had no childcare experience particularly. I didn't speak any Spanish at the time. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And my first job there was to sort through a big container of goods that had been donated from overseas to the orphanage. And in that container, I found a pair of skis. Now, you'll probably know Guatemala is not ski country. The orphanage is in the middle of the jungle and not much use for a pair of skis. But anyway, in that moment, I had this sort of realization, I guess, that I was very much like the skis, very well-intentioned, but not very much use in that context. So that's sort of my metaphor story that I tell about well-intentioned travelers. But the story's kind of evolved over the years too, to realize that actually I wasn't just well-intentioned but not much use. I was actually having a negative impact, right? And so there's quite a bit of research that has come out since then to show that we really shouldn't be volunteering in orphanages, and that orphanages are creating this demand for orphans essentially, and that 80% of children living in orphanages have at least one living parent. And so realizing that actually I was causing harm. And in fact, the skis were causing harm because they would have had, a carbon footprint of getting to Guatemala and then eventually probably being disposed of somewhere. So it's sort of, I think, a nice story to think about in terms of ourselves as individuals and how, good intentions are not enough, but also to think and acknowledge that we're all still learning as well. And so what I was thinking was good at that point in my life has changed considerably over the past 20 years. And I think that's a good thing to acknowledge, that we are still on that journey as well, and still learning more about what it means to be a good traveller.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really super important, that there's no need to be judgmental of people who do something that we now think there's a better way to do it, because they have to learn the process. And I think it's the job of people like us to be helping people to learn, better ways to do these things.
Exactly.
So, but take me back to 18-year-old Eliza. What possessed you? I mean, it's quite a long way to suddenly take off to Guatemala to go volunteering when you're only 18 and it's your first time to travel independently. I mean, even as, it might have turned out to be not a very good decision in hindsight, but at the time, that was a pretty crazy, brave thing to do.
Yeah, I suppose it was. I think it was quite a common thing to do, actually, because I grew up in the UK. So a lot of people took gap years and went and volunteered and tried to save the world in that year. So from that sense, it was, I guess, fairly common of people around me and what people were doing. Why I went to Guatemala, I'm not quite sure, except that this particular orphanage you could volunteer at for only $300, whereas a lot of the other volunteer programs are very expensive, which again, in retrospect, is terrible, right? To be saying that, yeah, there's so many things wrong with it.
It's okay. We forgive you.
Yeah, but I think it's good to be able to talk about these things openly, right? And to be able to say,
definitely.
This is something that I did and I shouldn't have done, and that hopefully others will learn from my errors.
So say you're an 18-year-old now listening to the podcast, what would you recommend someone who had the same thought that you did, that you wanted to, go and quote unquote save the world? Yeah. What kind of things would you recommend?
I love that question, Amanda. We actually, with Good Travel, recently hired an intern who was in high school, and we asked her pretty much that question. So if you have show notes, I'll send you the link, because she did all this research and created this video called Youth, Let's Be Good Travelers. And it's fantastic. And it's sort of, the top tips for what you should do in terms of really taking your time to research where you're going and what you want to do. And if you're considering volunteering, what are some ways to do that in a way that is genuinely beneficial to the host country, and highlighting that that's actually extremely difficult. And often, the best way to travel as an 18-year-old is really to go with the intention of learning from the people that you visit, and acknowledging that actually we don't know that much yet as 18-year-olds, and really taking that time to connect with local people and learn from them. And then when you return home, making that where you try to give back in different ways through your own communities or through people you met while you were overseas, and perhaps fundraising for them or that kind of thing. So,
some great advice from Eliza. And I have also linked to the Youth Let's Be Good Travellers video in the show notes. It's a great approach for the younger members of our audience or young people in your life who want to learn a little bit about this as well. So my next guest today is Jonathan Coleman from the Reset Tourism Fund at the UnTours Foundation. Jonathan has a lot of experience in this area, and I asked him Can we be good volunteerists, or is it just too hard to do it well?
I have come to the conclusion that it's really hard to do well. I'll say that the first 5 or 6 years of my adult life were spent working with an NGO that a big part of their work was hosting voluntourism groups. So I was very much in that world, and a believer in it when I started. And by the time I left, very much a non-believer in it. And I just saw all the negative side effects of voluntourism, of which there are many.
Tell us a few really of the worst parts.
Yeah, so the worst parts, one, it's just the work that was being done could have been done by local people and who would have done a better job and gladly taken the money to do the job that they knew how to do. And so we were kind of often creating projects for people, or setting aside projects that we should have just hired someone local to do, a painting or digging a well or putting blocks in a school or that kind of thing. That it's just better for the local community to do those things for 100 reasons.
Yeah.
So that's a big one, is just that, like, it's taking jobs away from local people, and there's other ways to give exposure to those communities, which can then drive donations and drive things that these organizations also need, which is why we were hosting these groups, because we needed their money.
Yeah.
Not in a negative way. Like, we were trying to do good work there, and we needed the money to do it, and they would become sponsors and fund the work they were doing on the week they were there, but also become long-term sponsors and that kind of thing. And we needed that to fund the operations. But there are other ways to do it besides giving work that others could do, and creating this false sense of kind of importance because the work they were doing was really not that important. So, and those are the soft things. There's a lot of child protection kind of issues around volunteerism that often center around schools and children's homes or orphanages and this kind of thing, that are really messy and can cause real problems, and have caused real problems. I wasn't part of any of those problems that I've read and heard of, kind of access that are given to kids that shouldn't be to strangers. And so that's a real problem in the volunteerism world, which is starting to fade away. There's the world has
mostly come to realize this is
but not entirely. The real massive issues in that sense. But also there's just a power dynamic thing that is really hard to come to terms with around, and maybe power dynamic, or like kind of a colonial mindset of, like, we are here to build you this amazing room because we are the rich folks who do these things, and we're going to bestow our good works upon you. And like that mindset is both really negative for the volunteerist, and it's not providing them a real true experience and a kind of a life-giving experience themselves. They think that it is, but it's not. And also on the ground, it's either disempowering in a way that makes people, that is difficult for local communities, or people within those communities, or it becomes kind of the culture builds up around that, and it becomes like ingrained in the local culture, is that these foreigners come in and do this work for us. And either there's like a disempowerment or
like an expectation,
that's the right word, around it, that neither of which of those is positive for
exactly.
I think when it comes to, like, for volunteerism, when there are real skills that are being offered that are lacking in those communities, a lot of times around healthcare, things like this, that closer to being the feeling okay for me. But still there's some dynamics around because it's often folks from the rich global north coming to the global south, often white folks coming and offering their services to people of color or communities of color, and that those dynamics live on when the kind of
even when the skills are useful, it's still tricky, isn't it?
Even when the skills are useful, it's still tricky. It's still hard to be done well. I think that it can be done well, but if you're not volunteering in something you are, like, trained to do, then for me it's not the right experience. Something that you're trained to do, and that skill is lacking in the local community. Like, those are the prerequisites for me. And otherwise, like, embed yourself in that community, experience that community, spend your money in that community. That's what they need. in a dignified way, you can support them.
Yes.
But to think that they need your labor, they don't need your labor. It's an experience being created for you, not for them.
More excellent advice. I must confess, I have once done that kind of work that could have been done by local people, kind of activity on a trip. And although it felt great at the time to be quote unquote helping, in hindsight, there were definitely much more impactful things we could have done. Now, speaking of impactful, my next guest is Keira Martinez from Love Without Borders for Refugees. Keira has taken volunteering to an extreme. I met her when the Rise Travel Institute hosted a virtual refugee art exhibition, which Keira had been heavily involved with. So I spoke this conversation with her is from about a year ago, but I've been following her online and she's continued her amazing work. So Keira didn't sign up just to some voluntourism trip. She absolutely created her own experience, and this is how it happened.
So I'm still working as a flight attendant. However, in 2015, I was based in Frankfurt, Germany for my job and flying to the US for work. And I saw on the television this influx of refugees coming from Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, and other countries. I had never met anybody from those countries. I couldn't speak their language, and I didn't know much about the situation. So what I did is I just got informed. I started to watch the news. I actually went to the train station and asked how I could help because I study German, so I speak German as well. And they were so happy. They needed clothes, and they basically asked me to volunteer, and I was so happy to do so. And since then, that was in 2015, so this has been over 6 years now. I've volunteered with dozens and dozens of nonprofit organizations throughout Europe. I found myself in Greece because that's where the biggest need is, and I've created multiple projects facilitating art workshops with children and adults from all of those countries. Right now, we have about 10 different countries that we're representing and supporting in Greece. So you can imagine the art that we have received from all of these people. We're doing mass distributions of food vouchers in refugee camps in and around Athens, giving to the people that have the most need, people that aren't supported by the government. And also we have built with some teachers in the United States a refugee curriculum that we're very excited to share. Wow. And that's going to be taught in the schools in the United States, but we can see this as a very big project spanning all sorts of different countries. And so we're very excited about all of these projects. We're looking at sustainable ways to support the people so that I can stay healthy, the people that I work with can stay healthy. That's very important, what I've learned. Yeah. And ways to bring more attention to the refugee crisis in Greece.
Amazing. It's incredible that you fit all of this in and still have a regular job and all of the other things that come with life. It's very impressive. Did you think when you began, did you have any idea that it would turn into all of this?
I had no idea. It's funny because I actually thought I was going to volunteer for 6 months or a year and then go back to my traveling jet set life. However, there was no chance of that because once you sit with the people, you speak with them, you look at them eye to eye, and you understand what they're going through. And you also realize it could be your mother or your father, your family. And also, if you have the opportunity to make changes, you're never going to go back to your life because there's just, I don't know, over 80 million displaced people in the world right now. The number is staggering. So I had no idea. And also I didn't realize that I had even the power or the ideas that I had. They came to me when I was with 20 kids in a refugee camp. And I thought, let's just bring paper and crayons and have a fun day today. Let the kids be kids and enjoy their childhood. well, now we have a global pop-up exhibition that's toured around to about 117 different cities on 4 continents. So,
That's amazing.
yes, absolutely.
Oh, I mean, it's such an example of, the whole out of little things, big things grow. That's amazing. But wow, it sounds like really hard work.
Yes, I've definitely gone through my ups and downs with this work and with volunteering, and I learn as I go. And as much as I've always tried to reach out to professionals or the people in the camp that are in charge, the NGOs, I realized that everything that I needed is within myself. And I'm the one with the answers. I'm fortunate I have a wonderful support group with friends and colleagues and volunteers that have always really been supporting. So
volunteering, a lot of people want to help in different ways, but volunteering can be fraught with danger, as in the situations where you actually volunteering is not helping at all, and those kind of voluntourism issues. What do you suggest if someone wants to help in some way? What is the best way to actually volunteer?
So I found the best way is for me to have a phone call with people when they're asking to volunteer, because then I explain to them exactly what we're doing and also the situations that the people are in, because I don't want to put somebody in a situation where they feel uncomfortable or sad. Or I think many people tell people not to spend their money on plane tickets and fly out to Greece because they could just send it to somebody always already working on the ground. But to be honest, in my experience, I really feel if you can't be there and see the situation firsthand and see the people, you're never going to understand, because I surely didn't.
Lots of food for thought there from Kara about how to be impactful if we want to volunteer. I think if you have some serious time to commit, then there's amazing opportunities like Kara has created for herself in between her flights as a flight attendant. Pretty incredible what she's done. Anyway, I hope that this has given you some thinking matter for the issue of whether volunteer tourism or voluntourism is good or bad. I think there is good or bad in anything, but anything and everything that we could do. But I think it's very important to be extremely thoughtful about any kind of opportunity you take up to do any volunteer work. And a lot of the time there are going to be better ways that will impact whoever you're trying to help better. It's not about you feeling good. It's about, about making sure that we help whoever we're trying to help, I think. Anyway, thank you very much for listening to episode 288 of the Thoughtful Travel podcast. A very big thank you to my guests. I started off chatting with Eliza Raymond of Good Travel. You can see more about her work at good-travel.org. And as promised, I've listed the Youth Let's Be Good Travellers video in the show notes as well, worth a watch. Thanks also to Jonathan Coleman from the UnTours Foundation. And I mentioned that he works with the Reset Tourism Fund. So they're actually investing about $10 million into small, high-impact tourism businesses to help them, be sustainable and effective and ongoing. Some really cool work going on there. I have more from Jonathan in future episodes. And lastly, I chatted with Kara Martinez, and you can find out more about the organisation and NGO she's running, lovewithoutbordersforrefugees.com. If you're curious to listen to more about volunteering experiences, then I also have episode 228 and episode 145, where I've chatted with other people about their voluntourism experiences over the years as well. So all of these links will be in the show notes for this episode. The show notes are at notaballerina.com/288. And of course, come and chat with us either in the Facebook or LinkedIn groups for Thoughtful Travellers. Those links are in the show notes as well. As always, thank you so much for listening. This has been another episode of the Thoughtful Travel Podcast. Show notes and other information are at notaballerina.com/podcast. Join me again soon for another chat about why we travel. Bye for now.